This episode of Coming Out and Beyond, LGBTQIA plus stories, featuring a conversation with lesbian couples expert, Dr. Robin Sesan, originally aired in December 2023. Today, we reshare this episode with you and invite you to join us at Dr. Sesan's upcoming workshop, Strengthening Love, Building Secure Bonds for Lesbian Couples, on October 17th in Provincetown, Massachusetts, during Women's Week. Tickets are available on Eventbrite. Spaces are limited. Link to the event information and to purchase tickets is in the episode description. And now, on with the show. You're listening to Coming Out and Beyond, LGBTQIA plus stories, a podcast that celebrates the wisdom, courage, experience, and joy of individuals in the queer community. Every week, we feature a guest who has a remarkable story to tell about their coming out and the life they've lived beyond. Now here's your host, Anne-Marie Zansel.
Hi, this is Anne-Marie Zansel, and welcome back to another episode of Coming Out and Beyond LGBTQIA plus stories. I have met a kindred spirit, and I want to welcome her to the show today. Her name is Dr. Robin Sesan. She is a licensed psychologist and certified emotionally focused couples therapist. She specializes in working with lesbian and queer couples and has recently developed an online coaching program for lesbian couples. Robin, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. Thank you. We are kindred spirits.
We are kindred spirits.
And I am just so happy to be back talking with you about what I'm doing, what you're doing. And thank you so much.
Well, every time Robin and I get together, we talk for 25 minutes before we even get to why we're getting together. So Robin, I would love to hear a little bit about your coming out story.
Okay. Because of course this is for the podcast, right?
Right.
Coming Out and Beyond. So, I am certainly considered a later in life lesbian.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that is I lived most of my life until I would say my late 20s in a very, very heterosexual path, on a very heterosexual path. Never even considered that there could be a different option. So always dated men and got married, heterosexually married when I was 28. But a little bit prior to that, I started developing some curiosity about lesbian relationships. And, my partner and I really joke about this. But when I lived in Boston, which was in between college and graduate school, there was this singer-songwriter lesbian couple, and their stage names were Jade and Sarsaparilla.
Mm-hmm.
And I was a little bit obsessed with them. So I loved their music, but I was also very, very interested in their relationship. And so there were some inklings, right? Inklings early on. But I pushed those aside, got heterosexually married and had 2 children and just said, yep, that's an area of life that I am not going to explore. My first marriage was not the best marriage. I was not super happy, and I did not feel really emotionally connected to him the way that I wanted to, but I really thought like this is kind of as good as it gets. It's really what I thought. And the other piece of it, I have to say, is that my self-esteem was not so great early on in my life. And so, this was a good guy. He checked all the boxes, and, we created a family. When I was in my mid-40s, I ended up working with a woman as part of a community volunteer project. So I, as a therapist and a practice, I have a practice of all women. It was a feminist practice. We partnered with a group home for women who were homeless as well as addicted. And I met Jude, who is my partner wife at this point. I met her there. And I felt something I never felt. And it was like I could no longer put that part of myself away. It stirred something in me, and it opened up a possibility that I didn't really know existed. And so I ended up bravely leaving my marriage in the hopes that I could have a different kind of relationship. And that's kind of the beginning of the story of me coming out. And I left this marriage, which was very, very hard to do, and developed a relationship with Jude. And that's now almost 20 years ago. So we've been now together longer than in my first marriage. And you know, like a lot of women talk to me, and this is what I hear over and over again, and this is what I felt. My experience with her felt like I was coming home to myself.
I absolutely, completely, 100% understand.
Yeah, I mean, it is just an amazing feeling. I really didn't.
And also a confusing feeling, because I remember that, of this sense of home. And I was like, why do I feel a sense of home with this person? I already have a home.
Right.
I was getting divorced, but I already have a home. I have children. That is my home. But when I was first with my wife, and we're very similar in the sense, both of you and I have been with the same person that when we came out, and we're both married to them. But when I was with my wife, I had such a sense of home, and I just really it really confused me at first, but then I realized, oh, it's because I'm coming home to myself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I had been missing her for a really long time.
Yeah. Well, what I did was put away that piece of myself.
Yeah, me too. I was somebody like you, like that, thought about it in my 20s, but in teens, but never really did anything with it.
Right.
My first experience was with a girl, but I put it in the shame category in my memories, and not the pleasant categories, memory categories. But that was oftentimes when women begin this coming out process later in life, they will really have all these recovered memories that they sort of suppressed for years and years. And I'm not saying recover. Oh, wait a minute. I didn't admire her. I had a crush on her. Right. Stuff like that.
Right. It's a reframing.
It's a reframing.
Those experiences.
And my in the summer of when I was 14, I had an experience with a girl and an experience with the boy. And because I lived in heteronormative culture, that experience with the boy was filed away as a sweet little memory of my first kiss. The experience with the girl was filed away as I did something really wrong.
Yeah.
And then when I came out, it got refiled to that was pretty normal for somebody.
That was my first kiss.
Yeah, that's pretty normal for somebody who's not straight. And so that's what happens to a lot of us, is that we reframe our memories.
Yeah. And for me, pursuing that relationship just became compelling. It was, I was going to risk a lot to change the course of my life, but it was just, this is what I want to do.
Hey, are you coming to Provincetown's annual Women's Week in October? We've got a couple of fantastic workshops on the schedule you might want to check out. Lavender Dating, Navigating Dating in the Digital World, is for women who want to date other queer women, but are lost when it comes to the world of online dating. This workshop is perfect for any woman, whether you're new to the lesbian dating scene or have been out for years, who wants to polish up their profile and set dating goals. And for you couples who want to work on your relationship, we have Strengthening Love, Building Secure Bonds for Lesbian Couples with psychologist Dr. Robin Sesan. In this workshop, you'll explore attachment styles and stresses that are unique to lesbian couples and learn how to create better trust and intimacy. Both workshops take place at the Provincetown Inn, Thursday, October 17th, 1:30 to 4:30 p.m. Tickets are available on Eventbrite. Spaces are limited. Sign up today.
You know, one of the things that, like, I don't want to end my life with a lot of regrets. And this was one of those junctures. If I don't pursue this, you know, how am I going to feel when I'm 80, right?
Well, that's so interesting you say that, because I worked in hospice for like 7 years before I came out.
Yeah.
And I was a hospice chaplain. And one of the things that I learned working with all the wonderful folks that I had over the years is that people don't regret the things they did. So if they do something and it doesn't work out, they may often make meaning out of it.
Mm-hmm.
People regret the things they didn't do.
Yep.
And I knew that if I didn't explore this part of myself when I was 80, I was gonna, when I was 100, lying on my deathbed, I would have had regret that I hadn't gone out and at least explored it, and so I'm really glad that I did that.
Yeah.
You mentioned, we've talked a little bit before. What was it like for you when you came out to your heteronormative culture?
So it was really, with some of the people in my life, it was fabulous.
Mm-hmm.
So my besties, my best friends, and coming out to my parents, who were in their early 70s at that time, was really quite positive. Like, I was really shocked that they were so understanding and so supportive. They had questions, and my dad would always go into the nurture versus nature conflict. Were you born this way? Whatever. But they really were very open in ways that I didn't expect them to be.
Well, and I'm sure your dad, nurture versus nature, was his feeling, oh, this is my fault.
Yeah.
Robin is not straight.
Right.
Because that's a lot of parents do that. I find, the funny thing is that, because I was in church work for a while, I find that people who are older, often there are some that don't change, but a lot of people are just often like, they've lived life and they have a lot of wisdom. And a lot of times they're just like, I just want you to be happy. Go just do what you need to do. Just try to be happy, because I think they value happiness, and they also know that it's also can be rare sometimes too.
Yeah. So that was, my besties and all that was all good. What was hard were, there were all these other people, I'd say, in my, outer layer of acquaintances who knew me as heterosexual. They knew that I got divorced, but then how do I talk to them about, like, because they just assumed I'd start dating men. And so what it ended up being was a pretty constant coming out process.
Right.
Like someone would say to me, have you met any men? And then I would have to say, well, to tell you the truth, I'm now dating a woman, right? And so there was just this constant coming out. And I remember, so I had a personal trainer. I still have the same personal trainer, but he knew me as heterosexually married. He knew that I got divorced, right? But it's not like it's an everyday conversation between us about my personal life. And so I realized, I don't know, about 3 years into my relationship with Jude, my personal trainer doesn't know about this. Like, how do I tell him? And isn't it weird that it's been 3 years? And how do I tell him? So one day I just walked in and I said, Drew, I just got to tell you something, you just need to know I'm involved with a woman. It's a really great relationship. And I just didn't know how to tell you without just telling you.
Mm-hmm.
And again, he was just totally fine.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the place where things really fell apart was I had developed and grown a practice of therapists. There were 10 of us in the practice. And when I came out as lesbian, there was a huge divide. Certain people in the practice felt that that was not going to be good for our practice, that people were not going to come see us if the head of the practice was gay. And so we ended up having a big split, and the practice split as a result of it. And, it was a baby that I had grown this from the ground up. And that was incredibly painful.
Well, and also such a loss, when you nurture a business from, just you by yourself to having 10 people in the practice. And I'm sure it took you by surprise too, because, you would assume people who are therapists, it's their homophobia was showing up.
Well, absolutely.
Probably that they're not aware of at all. No. Has any of them come back to you and since then and said, gosh, we made a mistake?
Not a one.
Huh, very interesting.
Not a one. And as a result of that, I really, really learned who my inner circle was.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So Robin has also been on my program, Queer Business Success. And so one of the things we were talking about, and we're going to get, now Robin is a couples therapist for lesbians, but one of the things I did want to talk to you, Robin, that both of us have experienced is the loss of privilege.
Yes.
And let's talk about that a little bit, because a lot of times people don't understand what we mean when we talk about that.
Right.
So how do you define it?
Well, so when you live your life in a heteronormative world, you don't have to think about a lot of things, right? So, when I was heterosexually married, if we went on vacation somewhere, there wasn't a second thought about any kind of public display of affection.
Or was it safe?
Right? Now, at times, like just recently, Jude and I were at this lake in Virginia. Virginia's a purple state.
Purple, yep.
We hope it turns blue, but it's a purple state. And we were in the lake, and she very quickly looked at me and said, it's not safe for us to touch here. And this is also one of the things that a later in life lesbian sometimes doesn't understand, because she has that lived experience over and over again, whereas I'm la-di-da, I'm in love with a woman, right?
Yeah.
But again, that's the loss of heterosexual privilege, that you have to think about it. The other thing, and I think you and I have talked about this is my biggest pet peeve, and it's not even so much a heterosexual thing. Well, it is a heterosexual thing. When two women walk into a restaurant together, they never give them the best table.
Absolutely not. But we don't know if it's because of our age or because.
But this has happened with a straight friend of mine.
Right.
We were sitting at this bar, ordering a drink, and this waitress was over the other side of the bar interacting with these heterosexual couples. And this is just a friend of mine, so not even my lover, right? And this bartender totally ignored us. And so there's another kind of heterosexual privilege that you lose. And they're little things, they're little microaggressions.
Right. They're more, well, there can be major aggressions. And I think that because you and I came out when we were 40 plus, that we miss the stuff that the younger lesbians have to deal with. We just missed all of the aggressions they get all the time. Like, oh, I can make you straight kind of aggressions and stuff like that. We didn't have to deal with that stuff. But I agree with you. I'll never forget, like, I was, it was always hard to get from where I lived to Nashville, where my girl, she was my then girlfriend, to visit her. And so a lot of times I would have to change planes. And so I flew into Huntsville, Alabama, and I was new. coming out. It's probably a year in or something. And I went to see her, like she was standing right by the car, and I went to hug her, and she goes, "You can't hug me here." She goes, "You just can't." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And it was like, it was just something that didn't even occur to me. And so now that I'm sort of aware of it, and this is one thing too. So like your wife and my wife who've been out forever, they're so used to it that they sometimes don't know like the tiny microaggressions. Like, and I think I talked to you about this when you were on the last podcast. Like my daughter got married, and I went to this regular place we go all the time. They're polite, they're professional, but I was saying, "Oh, my daughter was getting married." And now I have been in heterosexual world for a long time. And you usually tell another woman that, they're like, "Oh," they're so excited. There was no reaction, nothing. And it was just so slight that if you were somebody who'd been gay your whole life, you wouldn't have even noticed it.
Yeah.
But I did notice it. And it's like it's just, and even people that we love sometimes do it too, not referring to our wife as our wife and saying our partner and stuff like that. They don't, it's just, sometimes it's like people just are, it's tiny, it's small. They sometimes don't mean it. But you really do notice the difference of privilege as living a queer life versus a straight life.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the advantages in some ways you and I have, is that, well, it's a loss, but it's an advantage. We lived a heterosexual life, right?
And I call it our superpower.
Our superpower.
It is a superpower because we've lived both sides.
We've lived both sides.
So we really understand it. And I feel like there has been a wave of people coming out later in life. I mean, when you did that 20 years ago, it was still relatively rare. And there wasn't a lot of connection because the internet was just coming into existence. But because of the internet, we're able to connect with each other. And so there has been a really explosion of people, or maybe it's always been the numbers, but we haven't ever noticed it and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, things have changed a lot, and in some ways not at all. But yeah, I mean, I think it's easier now.
It's easier to find community.
Yes, it's much easier to find community.
But it's still, this is the thing, is that unfortunately, I will be in business until I want to retire, because a lot of the conservative faith traditions, all of that still, whether Christian, Jewish, Muslim, whatever, any of the conservative faith traditions, or just socially conservative people, a lot of that, they keep me in business because a lot of all that stuff still exists, and it is easier in a sense for being able to meet community and other people, but you still have to deal with all those feelings that happen for people when they come out. And it doesn't matter, in the 1970s, it must have been horrible because you could get your kids taken away from you if you came out as lesbian. But it is really interesting how it's not going away.
No,
I mean, look who was just became the Speaker of the House. It's not going away.
It's not going away. And one of the big things around heterosexual privilege is, and I don't know how much you experience this, but I live in fear that at some point my marriage will not be recognized, right? And when you're heterosexually married, you don't worry about that.
You don't even think about that.
Right?
Yeah.
Like one of the issues that I've been seeing in my lesbian couples is a lot of them chose to get married very quickly because after DOMA was overturned, because they were afraid that with a different presidency and a different administration, that they wouldn't be able to get married. And so again, in a heterosexual culture, people don't think about
it. Doesn't even occur to them.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So tell me about your work with couples.
So I began working with couples probably about 15 to 20 years ago. So I've been a therapist for 40 years. The first half of my career was spent doing mostly individual work. And part of why I never did couples work was because I didn't feel like I was in a good enough relationship to do couples work. So then when I made major life change and was in a relationship that was not without its problems, believe me, but we worked on them, right? I just felt like, oh, like I'm now in a relationship that I want other people to be able to
to
have.
experience, right?
Yeah. And so I just made a decision and got intensively trained in a couples therapy model that really resonated to me. It's called emotionally focused couples therapy. And got trained in that and just started doing couples work. And as I developed that specialty, more and more lesbian gay couples started seeking me out, in part because they knew about me, but also because on our website, I talked about, these are the couples that I like to work with, and so on and so forth. And so I've been doing couples therapy now for, 15 years or so, and decided, well, one thing happened during the pandemic. I learned how to do therapy online.
Yeah.
And while I still prefer to see people in my office, I can be very effective online at this point. And I started thinking about, how can I reach this population? How can I reach the population of lesbian couples in a broader way? And so I decided to develop what's called a hybrid coaching program, where I developed a course, an online course, with weekly lessons and homework assignments, and things to read, as well as coming weekly to a coaching session and have a private Facebook group. And the goal behind that was really twofold, maybe threefold. One is I wanted to have a bigger reach, because there are a lot of lesbian couples who are very isolated just in their own lives, but also isolated in their communities.
From community. They live in the middle of where there's not much queer community, or not much out queer community.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And I do really believe in the power of community to not feel so alone, and also to normalize what you're experiencing. And so this way I can teach what I think all couples need to learn, but with some of the nuances focused on lesbian couples, some of the issues around sexual minority stress, around homophobia, around alienation from family, like some of the, the different coming out stories. So I want to be able to address those things, and also address things like different attachment styles and negative cycles that we all get into, and how do we stop those negative cycles, and how do we create a more secure connection? How do we learn to be really accessible to our partner? How do we learn to be responsive? How do we learn to be emotionally engaged? Because the whole tenet of emotionally focused therapy is that emotion is the language of love. And so what I really want to help people do in the course, and I also help them in my sessions, is tap into the emotion and learn how to be vulnerable in sharing that with your partner. Because when you do that, your partner sees you in a whole different light, and they can't help but love you.
Well, I was going to ask you, so what are some of the core issues? Like I know you just named a whole bunch of issues revolving around the queer community, but what are some of the core issues that you find that most lesbian couples struggle with?
It's a good question. So I would say one of the top issues has to do with conflict. When you put two women together, many of whom have been socialized to avoid conflict at all cost and to keep the peace, right? They struggle with how to deal with conflict. And where conflict often comes up is that lesbian couples often bond early on through similarities. And
Right.
the mental health community has put kind of a negative spin on that, and they call it like merging, right?
Yeah,
But
of course.
it's not merging.
Yeah.
Women bond around similarity. But as they grow in their relationship and as they become, again, more of who they are, their differences become apparent.
Mhm.
That is often a very challenging point in a lesbian relationship. Questions like, are we really compatible? Can we really be different and also be connected? And because women are not very good at conflict, sometimes what happens is anger, resentment starts building up and ends up coming out in really indirect and at times hurtful ways.
I would agree with that.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's one of the first issues that often comes up in the therapy that we'll address in the course. How do you manage conflict? How do you manage difference? The other thing that often comes up is we are struggling in our sexual relationship. And there is a myth out there about lesbian
LBD. Yeah, lesbian bed death.
and I'm just going to say it's a myth. It's a myth. Okay. That's not to say, though, that there aren't some unique issues when you put two women together. One of them is that, again, women are socialized not to initiate. Women are also taught that their sexual desires and interests are shameful. So we have two women together, neither of whom feels comfortable initiating, both of whom might feel embarrassed by their sexual needs. And so what do we have? We have avoidance. Okay. And so it's not that there's no interest, it's that the mechanisms of getting your sexual relationship online after the initial honeymoon phase,
Yeah.
right, becomes a little bit challenging.
Yeah, I would say so.
And
I agree.
and also as part of that, I mean, 1 in 3 women have experienced some kind of sexual abuse. Chances are one of the women in the couple is going to have had a sexually abusive experience in her life. And if that has not been processed, if that has not been healed, then they're going to bring that problem into their sexual relationship.
I have a question for you. My wife, she has experienced, since she's been out for a long time, she has experienced that in relationships, that when someone has not processed their sexual trauma or sexual abuse trauma, that sometimes they come on very strong in the relationship in the beginning, and then it sort of just fades away, and then nothing happens.
Right.
Is, I wasn't, sometimes I question things and I'm like, is that a myth or is that just a ton of myth? Is that real or is that just a ton? Is it real? Is that, would you agree?
Like, does that really happen?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, that does happen. And there are ways as a couple that you can deal with that, right? Even if the sexual trauma has not been fully processed. Because what's really important is that the woman who has the sexual trauma has a way to set boundaries, can share with her partner what feels okay and what doesn't. And they learn that in the middle of lovemaking, if something comes up for the partner who's traumatized, that she then can reach for her partner in an emotional way and say, I need this to stop right now. I just need you to hold me. And so there really, and I just got chills when I said that, and there really can be ways that within the relationship, some of that trauma can get healed. And that's the other reason why I love doing couples therapy, because there's something very, very powerful about healing within the relationship.
Right. I agree with that. I think that, I've always like advise my folks that, like, if they are experiencing conflict or some of the stuff that you've just described in their relationship with their partner, the real question is the partner ready to take a look at that and work with you? Because I do believe that in like, I'm a Stan Tankin fan, that in a relationship that you really do have an opportunity to heal each other from past traumas. And I have seen that with my wife and I. Like there have been things that have happened that where she responds in a way that no one else has ever responded to me in my life. And so like, that in that moment, it does heal a piece of some of the stuff that I have experienced. And vice versa. I mean, I have done that too, where you just show up, to that scared little girl and you give them comfort, because both of us come from pretty chaotic childhoods, which that's very normal. Typically, people who come from chaotic childhoods, we find each other. My ex-husband came from one too.
I just assume we all
we all pretty much do. When I meet somebody that says, "Oh, I had an amazing childhood," I'm always like, "What?"
Well, I actually just finished up working with a couple. I didn't see them for very long. It was a lesbian couple, and they were the healthiest two people I've come across in a long time.
And you're like, wow.
Right, yeah. They both had really good self-esteem. They were able to be vulnerable with each other. They were able to connect. They were able to not get defensive. I mean, it was like 6 sessions, and hey, you guys are good to go.
Well, that's wonderful. Good for them.
I know. Yeah.
So since I work with later in life lesbians that are often in their first female relationship, I don't want to focus on the negative. What are some green flags? Like when they're in, because they get so worried about, and then a lot of times they do all the reading about the catalysts and they're, and how disastrous can be. And so a lot of times women in their first relationship are very worried about like how to maintain it. How, is it going to end? I mean, it is a big concern. What are some green flags? If you're just coming out, you are in your first queer relationship with somebody, what are some things that are positive?
Positive, you mean to look at?
Yeah, like you're like a green flag instead of a red flag. Like, what's a green flag?
Well, okay. So one of the things that comes to mind is you want to be with someone who's patient and can really give you the space to kind of navigate the transition.
And that is very hard.
It's very hard.
Especially if you're somebody who's been out for a really long time, because sometimes you forget like how hard it is when you're first coming out, and it's very hard not to take on your partner's sorrow of the end of her old life. And it's it took my wife a full year to realize that it had nothing to do that my sorrow over the end of my marriage, over the end of the way I had lived my life, really had. She was a spot of joy in my life during that time, but it took her a year to realize that, oh, wait a minute, this isn't about me.
Right.
But it was hard. Because she had never been in I was the first woman she'd ever been in a relationship with that had children. She had never been with a woman.
Well, that was, children. We didn't get to it, but that was the other that often comes up.
Yeah.
Is, what do you do with the blending of a family and this parent and what role do they have? But let me get back to your question, because I think it's an important one. So, there's the patience. And what you need to have patience is you need to have your own sense of security. Because what often happens in these relationships is that the partner who is not the later in life partner ends up feeling insecure about, well, am I just the first one, and is she going to move on from me, and am I the person bringing her out, and is she just going to leave me? And so I think having a partner in that transition who's patient and has a sense of security and really, really wants this relationship to work.
How about the women that both leave their husbands at the same time to each other? Because that's a totally different dynamic. Like, what are some of the green flags for that?
So often when that happens, those women have been really good friends
Mm-hmm. Right.
Is that
Absolutely.
is that what you're finding?
Yeah.
And so for those women, I think they have a solid basis of
Mm-hmm.
friendship and trust. And so again, I think seeing that as a green flag is very, very important. That something has developed between the two of them over a period of time that can be trusted.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's a green flag. This is a really challenging question.
Well, I also think it's a green flag too, is even if you're both leaving marriages, like the second piece of advice about the sense of, giving them a space to navigate. Because when I don't know, when two women, find each other and leave their marriages and end up together, how their families and spouses can react totally different.
Right.
Like somebody can have a really supportive ex-spouse, their family's fine, and then somebody could be like, have somebody that tortures them. And then people are so angry at them, and so their level of what happens, it is different. And so sometimes you have to give your partner just the space to be able to grieve what they need to grieve when they are changing their life significantly like that.
Yeah, so I think that's probably one of the biggest factors. The other thing that comes to mind is, as a green flag, is if both of the women can talk about what are the emotional issues coming up, right? And again, not take it personally. Be able to listen with curiosity, because as you were saying, they may have different experiences or they may have some of the same experiences. But what's so important is just to listen with that kind of curious mind, open heart, so that you can say, this is hard, right?
It is hard.
It's great and it's joyful and I love being with you, and it's hard. I am giving up things.
Well, and also too, it's very hard for some people to understand that two things like that can exist at the same time. That, especially if one of the partners comes from a place where, it was either good or bad, and was it. There was nothing in between. There was no nuance. And so I always feel like, the coming out process is like this holding of two opposite emotions at the same time.
Absolutely.
And often many other emotions too. But like I did a piece for What's Your Grief, and talked about the grief of the later in life coming out experience. And there's this little, like the little graphic we used is like she was holding a ball that had joy, and one of them, and the other ball held grief. And so, holding joy and grief at the same time, which is really hard and can be an exhausting and can feel overwhelming. Another thing I have noticed too is that a lot of times women coming out later in life often have a really good relationship with their catalyst, or with, and often throw it away because of pressure that they get from family and friends, or they think, oh, I need to go and be with a bunch of women before I settle down on somebody. And so I think that a lot of times people don't, like, I personally think that sometimes people like give up too easily and just say, this isn't going to work because of XYZ. But a lot of times they have a really good person. They just need to sort of navigate all the hard things that people have to navigate when, and a lot of times people have been in the relationship with their spouse or their husband for 20, 30 years. Right. And that's the only person they've ever dated. So they've never really dated anybody in their life. And so I see a lot of people give up on relationships sometimes that are good. And also too, I see people give up on relationships that are extremely toxic. And you're like, why are you with this person?
Right, exactly. But it's also why I'm putting together this course. I mean, because like, I don't know what kind of lesbian couples, are going to join. I'm sure it'll be a variety, but especially the couple where one is later in life and the other is lifelong, right? There are challenges to those relationships. A lot of pretty unique challenges. And
Yes.
I want to support those relationships.
Well, and it's funny because I often get the women that are the longtime lesbians who reach out to me because there's nothing out there. Because, we know as like in the queer community, they'll say run, And it's like, it's not that simple,
No,
it's just not that simple. And
Mm-mm.
a lot of times people who have been out a long time just really have a lot of challenges with it. So I'm really glad that you're going to be able to support them and I
Yeah.
can send them somewhere because I'm not a I don't want to do couples work. I commend you for doing that. But I'm not a couples person. And so, I think it's really good to have that available for people because it is confusing and also too, like you forget the feelings of what it's like, to just come out. A lot of women do think that am I going to be someone's experiment? I hear that,
Right.
And a lot of times, and also two people who've been out a long time have often dated somebody who's just starting to come out and then the person decides not to come out.
Exactly.
And so they've been hurt before. And so they're very, very cautious. And so it's unique challenges when somebody is like, everybody's past 35 and, someone's been out for a while and someone's just coming out. There are very unique challenges.
I know, you just gave me a thought. We could do a mini course.
Yes.
For this lesbian couple pairing. Right?
Yes.
Like that would be so great, especially for them early on in their relationship.
It would, because that is like probably I'm in a lot of those groups online, and that is often like some of the things that people ask continuously. And that's we'll talk. So Robin, tell me what your coming out song was.
I put this on the forms.
I can help you.
I know. Okay. So there's this song from Wicked that is called Defying Gravity. And that is like my theme song, right? Because I feel like I defied gravity. And
so you know what? That's my song too.
Oh my God.
Yeah, that's one of my songs. And also, This Is Me. I'm a Broadway show person. There's a gay man madly in my body trying to escape. But
yeah, so
that one,
gravity. And I might have put down the Indigo Girls. The
Power. You did.
Yeah,
you did. That's a sweet song. I really like that.
That is a really good song. Yeah.
And you love The Secret Life of Bees?
Oh, I love that book, and I thought you would, resonate to that by Sue Monk Kidd. I mean, when I think about the books that linger for me, they have certainly very strong, powerful women,
female characters. Yeah.
Yep, women heroines, and they're also survival stories. So there's The Secret Life of Bees. I think I put down The Nightingale, which is about the resistance, women's resistance during World War II. And so, there really is a theme to the books that I carry with me.
And how would you describe your life today? A lot of change. How would you describe it now?
My life today is wonderful. I really can't complain. My life. I have a very good, full, happy life with people in my life who love me and cherish me. And, Jude and I often say, we have the best relationship of anyone we know. And, that's just a really good feeling. And, I just celebrated my son got married in September, and we were all there together, my ex-husband and his girlfriend and Jude and me and my daughter and her girlfriend. And it was just a wonderful celebration. So, I'm good. I'm good in my life.
So if people want to find you, where can they find you and how do they reach out to you?
Okay. So the best way to get a hold of me is through my website, which is securelesbiancouples.com. I also have an Instagram page, Secure Lesbian Couples. And you can also go to my private practice website, which is the Brandywine Center. And you can email me from there. You can call me from there. So, if you just type in Robin Sesan, two things will come up. My psychology practice, and then which we haven't talked about is I also have an art business. And so Robin and Sesan art will come up as well. And you can contact me through either place.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being on the show today, Robin. It was wonderful to talk with you.
Yeah, you too. You too.
You've been listening to Coming Out and Beyond, LGBTQIA plus stories with Anne-Marie Zanzel. New episodes of the Coming Out and Beyond podcast drop every other Friday. You can tune in at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and at annemariezanzel.com. Be sure to hit subscribe when tuning in so you never miss an episode. And for more resources, articles, videos, and a free downloadable guide for coming out later in life, visit annemariezanzel.com.